Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Seth. I'm the CEO here at Certora, and I appreciate you all joining us. Just as a quick introduction to me, I joined Certora about 8 months ago. My background prior to being here at Certora is initially static analysis and code analysis with a focus on software quality and software security. And then more recently, a cybersecurity background, really focused on data security and network security in regulated industries prior to joining here at Certora, where I've shifted my focus to Web3 and this new world of DeFi. Joining me today is Ofek, one of our team leads here at Certora and one of our senior researchers. I don't see Ofek here on the call. He seems to have dropped off. He may be having technical issues. So the goal for our talk today was to talk about how DeFi hacks have changed in the last 5 years and what this means for protocols. And I think we introduced in the announcement 2 different hacks that are really incredibly interesting, and we'll probably start our discussion there. The 2 attacks that we talked about are the CPIMP attack and another one that's called Glassworm, and both are fascinating in their own right. After we've gone through a bit of those attacks in specific detail, just talking about what's so interesting about them, the next thing that we want to do is get into what does that mean looking forward, and what does that mean for protocols? And I think a good transition to get there is to start with a discussion about what it's like to go into the mind of an attacker. We'll talk a little bit about the hacker perspective and how that has changed and evolved across the industry, and more specifically in the world of Web3 over the last few years. And I think that informs a lot of what we saw in 2025 and will again inform what's coming in 2026. So that'll be the lens through which we start transitioning from these 2 interesting attacks and what's unique about them to the future. And with Ofek back, why don't you introduce yourself, Ofek?
Perfect. Hi there, everybody. My name is Ofek Ray. I'm one of the team leads here at Certora. I've been doing vulnerability research, offensive and defensive, for the last 12 years. Only been in the DeFi space for about 2 years, but the 10 years before that has been doing a lot of great work at Intel, doing red teaming for them, pen testing, writing offensive tools for embedded systems, and defensive tools, obviously. So a lot of background in various fields, and now Web3, which is the most exciting so far.
So Ofek, while you were out, I introduced the outline of what we're going to talk about today. And I think with that in mind, we'll just dive right in. So the first thing that I wanted to get into is the 2 hacks that we advertised in our announcement of this event. And the first one to talk about is the CPIMP attack, the clandestine proxy in the middle of proxy attack, which is a fascinating one. So maybe you could just give us an overview of what it is, and we could talk a little bit about what's so unique and interesting about it.
Oh, perfect. So the clandestine proxy in the middle proxy attack, which is probably the last time I'll use the full name for it, is an attack that we see a lot from Web 2, but this is one of the first time that we see something like this in Web 3. Generally speaking, this is a type of initialization hijacking. So whenever there's a proxy initialization, if you can front run the first initialization, you can initialize with your own implementation. So far, interesting maybe, but what makes this exciting? So we see that the attackers not only initialized with their own implementation, but they went into very far-reaching lengths in order to cover their tracks. So in the attack vector world, we call that persistency, right? You get a foothold into a system, in this case, the implementation of a protocol, and then you want to keep that control. And at a later time, you want to push your red button in order to gain information, steal funds, redirect actions, whatever you'd like. We see these types of attacks mostly as part of campaigns. So this is, you can call it like enterprise level attacks, but it mostly is done by a group of hackers or governments or things like that. Campaigns like that usually are bigger, a lot more setup. So what's interesting in this specific attack is the various different tools that they used to cover their tracks. The reason it's called proxy in the middle proxy is that a major thing that this code that they're doing does is imitating the original implementation so that the deployer won't actually know that somebody hijacked them. So every single test would run fine because there's going to be redirection to the real implementation, the intended implementation. So that's level one. But they did a bunch of more things. So another thing that they did was what happens if that proxy is upgraded as part of adding new features? They still want to maintain that foothold. So as part of the upgrade chain, their and control proxy, right, their warhead, is injecting its own code for every upgraded version. So once you've been infected, and keep in mind, you can get infected in a later stage, right? But once you're sort of infected, every single upgrade from that point is going to go through their pipeline, which is going to be reinstitute their malicious code and then only upgrade the sub implementation that is being later called from their redirection pipeline. So that means they have persistency, but persistency through upgrades. The second thing they did is they allowed fine control interactions with the protocol. So you can imagine you could just have, oh, okay, they just had some defaulting, and then every single call is just delegated to the original implementation, and maybe they have like one God button that steals all the funds, something like that. Okay, interesting. But keep in mind, this is a sophisticated attack. There's been a lot of resources put in. So they actually implemented a bunch of subroutines, which you can call, which is not just God mode. So you can call maybe filter in. So if a specific method function in the infected protocol is called, then you can create a sort of filter that redirects for that specific call. It goes through your hook before. So let's say you want to attack only deposits. I'm saying attack, but you want to influence only deposits, right? So you will create that hook only for deposits, and you can do it after you've infected them. You don't have to set everything in advance. Another thing that you can do is you can specify only something that happens when a specific address calls. Maybe you want to attack one user and not the whole system to reduce noise, to siphon funds, slowly keeping your attack in place. So that fine control is also there. And then the third major thing that they did is they actually found a vulnerability in Etherscan. It's been patched a while ago, which allowed them to imitate the original implementation. So even if you use an external tool like Etherscan that we all trust and love, it would show the wrong implementation, which is scary, right?
Yeah, so feeding off of that, Ofek, the Etherscan bug is fascinating. So Etherscan looks at the specific proxy implementation to figure out what the underlying implementation is. And each proxy standard stores the underlying implementation in a different place. And they realize that if they put the wrong data in an old slot for an old style of proxy, Etherscan would just pick it up. But beyond the technical details, one of the things that I thought was really fascinating about this attack is that, and again, this is my speculation, but my speculation is their intention was to have this exist for a long, long time. They never wanted to be detected. I think what they wanted to do was to set up a steady, enduring income stream that would last for years, where they selectively siphoned off funds from a broad range of protocols that they had targeted very specifically. So the clandestine proxies were not all the same. They were actually customized to each attack. And I think they may have intended to do this for quite a long period of time.
This is speculation, but in this sort of attack, what I'm thinking is it's more sort of like a grooming attack, where they want the markets that they infected to grow large enough to be actually valuable, right? Imagine if you had, like, it's an attack, but it behaves like a rug pull, right? You don't rug pull when there is just, one ETH in the system. Well, maybe one ETH is a lot, right? But if you have like a point 0.1 ETH in the system, right? You wait until there's enough funds and you have your own risk to value ratio to be able to instant that attack. It can be that they also had other malicious reasons, but at least what I've seen, it's mostly for funds. In Web 2, we have uh, more resources, right? It's not just funds. You can have, maybe you want to, I'll take just an example, right? Turn off the electricity in a city, right? You have that, it brings you value, not just monetary value. You cause you cause a crash in the market, something like that. So you have other resources that are not strictly monetary, but at least in Web3 attack, we see that the motivation is almost exclusively to extract the most value. And again, this is speculation. I'm not.
Yeah, and continuing on the speculation and also transitioning to our next bug, I think one way to look at why they might do this, and again, speculation, is that if you wait long enough and you believe that Web3 is going to grow to be more and more essential to the overall world financial system, then you can see a rug pull through an entirely different lens. It's not just about money, it's about causing financial panic. And depends on your horizon of patience. But if you talk about $1 trillion security, well, rug pulling on $1 trillion system is far more interesting than even what we have in DeFi today. And so I think we'll talk more later about where these attackers are coming from and what their motivations are over time. But I think looking forward, it's interesting to think maybe motivations are shifting. Now, one of the things you mentioned there, Ofek, is that in Web 2, we have a much broader surface of attack. And obviously, ransomware is like a thriving business on the Web 2 side and has nothing to do with stealing money directly, but rather stealing information. However, the second attack is an interesting crossover with Glassworm. And before we get into the details of that, just to frame the discussion here, one part of what Glassworm did is really targeted to Web3, where clearly they were looking for different types of wallet extensions and trying to decrypt and steal private keys. But another thing that they did is using a pretty interesting command and control structure, which we'll talk about in a minute. They were installing a VNC client on all of the infected machines so that you could steal anything. And it opens up the question, what were they really after? And the answer is anything and everything on your machine. So with that, why don't you take us through how that attack works and what's unique and interesting about it on the tech side, and then we'll get back to why it's such a fast-ending attack beyond the tech.
Oh, for sure. Maybe a bit of a disclaimer, right? We're going to phrase things as maybe organization level attacks, just because we see a lot of different components and a lot of resources pulled into these sort of attacks. We don't know the actors per se. It can be like one genius savant hacker that does that. Our estimations is based on different attacks that we saw in different domains, where the ingenuity and the different set of tools you bring into a single attack. I'll just mention the previous attack briefly, and then we'll go back to the new one. In the proxy in the middle attack, we see that they use a vulnerability in Etherscan. That should give you an indication that it's either a group or something bigger, because usually they have gadgets. They have multiple different tools that they found in their own research, and then they're choosing which ones to employ for a specific attack. Glassworm is another sort of complicated, multifaceted attack that uses some old techniques that we know from Web 2, but it also innovates and adds new features that we haven't seen before. So proxy in the middle, we saw not in Web 3, but we saw that sort of attack, those sort of components. It's great. We haven't seen it in that domain, in Web 3 domain, but it hasn't brought anything new to, like, in terms of a way of attack is conducted. Glassworm did have actually some things that are ingenious that we haven't seen in the wild yet, even in Web 2. So the way the glass worm, and we can provide, maybe we'll do it, I don't know, in the email list, or we can provide links to blogs. Maybe we'll do it on the Twitter. I'm not sure. So you guys can read the technical details in depth. But what they did in Glassworm attack is they infected VS Code extension. This is why we call it a supply chain attack. You don't necessarily attack the protocol itself, but each protocol uses, it's not just a guy in a shed with a computer that's never been plugged to anything writing EVM assembly, right? They're using an IDE, they're using pre-built packages, they're using Foundry, Anchor, what have you. All these software tools that you use in order to deploy in the end, even GitHub, right, are part of your tool chain. And if you can attack a part of that chain, you maybe have a vulnerability that can propagate later down the line. So in this case, they created a malicious VS Code, a malicious VS Code extension, which if you add it, and it looks great, if you add it to your IDE, it will infect you and will do a bunch of things. One, it will go to, like, I think they said 50 different wallets, and it would extract your private key from those to later steal your funds. But another thing that it did is it went and tried to get your GitHub cookies and all that stuff in order to check if you are specifically on this machine developing a VS Code extension. And if you are developing a VS Code extension, it would infect that extension. It would push to that extension an infected module, which would mean that after you compile and you send it to the marketplace, everybody else who uses your extension would also get infected, steal their wallet keys, and if they are developing an extension, it would infect them. That is the worm in Glassworm. The reason why it was dubbed Glass by the researcher who found it is the malicious code that does that, and it does a couple other things, is in unprintable characters, right? So your IDE, your terminal, your Notepad++, what have you, doesn't actually view those. It just seems like a lot of spaces because it's symbols that are unprintable. And then there's some obfuscations done on that to basically make it seem that if you are a studious developer and you go through the VS Code, you might gloss over. You might see just, oh, this file in the extension that uses it has just 300 lines of spaces or new lines. Oh, it must be nothing. It must be a bug, and you'll think nothing of it. So that's the glass. It's like invisible. It's unprintable. Even if you use various static analyzer, various tools like that, usually the heuristics on those, or at least before that attack became known, missed the Glassworm just because the symbols they used were unprintable. There are various techniques to create, we call that a warhead, shell, what have you, that is unprintable. It usually involves a parser that takes the characters and then deparse them into the real characters. There's a lot of different mechanisms to do this. This is not the ingenious part. It's cool. It's unique. We have seen it before. Infecting other VS Code extensions, again, really cool, really unique. We've seen before, not altogether. Hijacking private keys, also really interesting. We've seen versions of that before. What they have done here, which is new, and obviously adding multiple things is interesting, but what actually is new is they shifted the command and control to be on chain. What is command and control in this meaning? A server that you ping or you get notifications from to tell you what to do with your tool, how to upgrade your tool, how to siphon funds, how to maybe delete itself, right? All these instructions are done through some sort of server, usually web to a like HTTP address that you ping, and then it tells you what to do. What they have done here is they actually used on-chain transactions, and they put the instructions of what to do into the, oh, it must be called like memo or notes. There's a field that you can append to transactions, which is usually not used. And they put there encrypted, obviously, with a rotating key. This is not plain text, right? Something that your VS Code extension would pull the transactions, would decode, and then if it sees that specific sign memo with an instruction, then it would conduct that. That is new, to the best of our understanding. Using Web3 as your command and control center, using Web3, which is famously public and always accessible, and anybody can access it, and anybody can see the transaction there. Using that to propagate upgrades to your warhead, propagate any instruction, like if you want to target a specific machine and siphon only their funds, whatever, that is a game changer. And I won't be surprised if we see variations of that used in other Web 2 and Web 3 attacks. It will probably be much better hidden, but I won't be surprised if that gadget is going to be used again.
So to add a little bit to that, Ofek, and I think you make the right point, it was the Solana blockchain that they did this on. They used this the command and control. And what's interesting is the typical way you bring down a worm like this is by taking the command and control servers offline. But so you find which IP address the worm is contacting and you bring it down. And there's no great way to upgrade your worm once it's spread. But these guys are brilliant. So what they do is they contact the Solana blockchain. They get the latest transaction signed by the attacker's wallet, which is untraceable, of course. And now they have an upgrade mechanism. If they want to move the command and control server because you brought down the first one in trying to defend against the worm, they just submit a new transaction and now they have a new server. So they can keep moving the attack from place to place to try to avoid any attempts to bring it down, which is absolutely brilliant. Also fascinating, the last thing that they did is they used Google Calendar as a backup to the backup. And so they put an encrypted, base64 encoded payload in the subject of a Google Calendar event. And again, they know you're not going to bring down Google Calendar to stop the worm. And so they were smart to have the backup to the backup be yet another system that nobody's going to bring down. So what I think is really interesting about this attack is, first of all, it's multifaceted. So the first thing that they did is they looked at private keys and trying to see if you were actually a private key holder and had a wallet extension on your machine. Then it looked to spread. The second thing they did with their command and control payloads is they set up a SOX proxy. And then the third thing that they did is they created a hidden VNC connection on infected devices. And when you get to the SOX proxy and the hidden VNC connection, you start to see they had big plans here. It's not clear what exactly those big plans were, but stealing a little bit of money out of local wallets was just part one to the game. And part two and part three could have been much, much bigger had they not been caught. So I think that's a great way for us to start shifting gears a little bit and ask this question. We've talked about two very subtle attacks, one going after the supply chain, another going after the deployment and initialization of a contract. What is the right thing to do if you're a protocol builder to protect yourself? You obviously can't anticipate the next crazy idea. So some thoughts, Ofek, with you first about what do you do?
Yeah. So two major points that I want to start with. One, don't lose hope, right? Don't say, "Oh, it's so broken. There's so many attacks. There's no point," right? This nihilistic view is just not true. There's a lot of things you can do as a developer to make the attacks so hard to be unfeasible, or at least make the attacker go somewhere else. In terms of concrete advice, things that you can do is make sure that you understand how you develop, right? Your tool chain, which packages you're using, which extensions you're using. Be judgmental and use the minimum things that you need But on the other hand, you don't have to be paranoid. Don't be paralyzed. What I see sometimes is that people are um, so paralyzed because they heard of one attack or the other that it just stops them from doing anything. Now, as a security researcher, obviously I can repeat the mantra, right? The most secure protocol is the empty protocol, right? Sure, if I just don't deploy anything, if I don't develop anything, it's 100% secure. Yes, but then it's also not useful. So if you have an organization, if you're developing by yourself, ask yourself, what is the system I'm developing on? Did I download needless extensions? Do I have needless programs on that machine? Maybe I can check traffic to see if it's pinging anything on the outside. Consult auditing firms. Obviously, people who invest most of their time into figuring out what is scarier than other things, helping direct you in that. If you're really big, you can maybe employ your own internal auditing firm, right? To make sure that your protocol is up to standard, up to spec. If there's a standard, use the standard, right? Very rarely, if I see somebody developing their own version of something that is the standard, I will start researching there because there will be an issue there. Make sure you're up to date with the news. And if you're using any packages, make sure you're using the up-to-date version of them. In case there is a vulnerability, you can upgrade your own code. So these are the major advices. And if you follow those, you'll be so much more secure that obviously not 100%, but in security, it's never about 100%. It's about, can I be secure enough to develop useful things?
And I would add to that, Ofek, that I think a lot of security is about really thinking through what are the most sensitive things that you're doing and how do you protect them well. And I'll take as an example something that I think is horribly wrong and was part of the Glassworm exploit. The idea that a browser extension is a safe place to decrypt a private key and sign transactions that move money is a flawed concept built from a wrong threat model. A more sensible threat model would have said, this is a highly vulnerable piece of code. It's in an environment where the code is interpreted because it's JavaScript code running the extensions, and therefore it's not a safe place to decode a private key. But really taking a step back, it's a matter of when you design your system, think about where the most secure operations are happening, how they're happening, and how you're building that code in a way that minimizes threat surface. And that can go a long way, a little bit of thought up front. And obviously that's why we have HSM wallets that keep the private key signing off in an offloaded system that is secure, et cetera. That's one architectural example. But in anything you're doing, it's really about trying to figure out how you minimize that threat surface. So moving forward a little bit and starting to transition before we get into questions, and I see some questions coming through the comments, which we'll get to at the end. Moving forward to 2026 and beyond, I would make the following statement about the right way to look towards the future, which is you have to start from your own theory of the hacker mentality. And I think I'll offer mine, and then Ofek, please add to it and offer your own. I often think of the world of malicious actors as almost like a sales team. And being the CEO here at Certora, I have a sales team. And so for my sales team, I want some kind of transactional business because I want my team to go out and find individual engagements that are smaller maybe, but they don't take as long of a sales process to close so that they can be ongoing business day to day. And I also want my sales team to go after some giants and try to get really good deals for us with strategic customers, et cetera. I think hackers often think the same way, especially when you're talking about organizations that are in the business of hacking. They're businesses like any other, and they have their transactional business in phishing and social engineering and private key, exfiltration. And then they have their big game hunting, where they're really trying to build huge business opportunities. And the CPIMP attack is one example of that. Certainly not the only. The whole idea of the advanced persistent threat is this is the big business guys, the North Koreans, the centralized organizations across the world who view this as not just a financial opportunity, but a huge strategic opportunity. So if you start from that perspective, you want to make sure that you're not the easiest target. Everybody's looking to execute their business and succeed. They want to close the deal by stealing something. And therefore, you have to worry about, am I the most likely candidate for private key exfiltration? If I'm not, then they'll probably go attack somebody else. And similarly, when you look at the more strategic perspective, have you put enough investment into the security of your architecture, your initialization, the deployment of your protocol, et cetera, so that there are other more fertile grounds for the attackers to go to, because they're running a business and they're not going to spend 6 months on you to steal $100 million when they can spend 1 month on the next guy and steal $100 million. So it's always about raising the bar and trying to stay ahead of the game. That's how I think about it. Ofek, what do you think?
Sure. When I think of the attacker mentality, and I had to take that role, obviously in very legal scenarios, is there's a few like axioms that we're going to talk about in a moment, but attackers take the path of least resistance, right? If the protocol is bad, they'll attack the protocol. If the protocol is good, they'll see how the backend is behaving. If the backend is good, it will see who the signer are and can you reach the signers themselves. Attackers would always choose the path of least resistance. And I will mention like 3 different ways how that idea is you can act upon. One of them, as Seth mentioned, is unless you're like a president of something, right? You would not be targeted personally, right? The attackers are going to find the path of least resistance. They're going to find the lowest hanging fruit. If you're not the lowest hanging fruit, by definition, there will be less eyes on you. So even if you don't have the perfect protocol, it will be less likely, statistically speaking, that somebody will find something in your protocol out of the sea of everything else. Okay? Second thing, again, path of least resistance. How you allocate your resources. If you have a wall that's 10 feet tall, an attacker is not going to climb above it. It's going to go around. So there is no reason using resources to make that wall 100 feet higher. What I see a lot, and this is why I mentioned don't be paranoid. Get to a secure place, but at some point, you're investing your resources not in the places where you're weakest at, but in the areas that you're strongest in. So diversify, if you will, but always assess where am I most vulnerable, and then invest your resources there. The third point, and this is something that I think is the most important, and this is saying, just because the river is shallow doesn't mean we build a bridge over it. If there is an area that you know that you're weak in, then maybe you don't have the perfect solution. You can't design the perfect solution, but you can have something that is good. It's not perfect, but it's good. Do what's good. Don't just because an attacker can theoretically hijack your car media and then through that hijack your phone and whatever and steal your keys that way. That doesn't mean you don't do best practices. Don't make it easy for them just because it's possible. I think, Seth, you have one of my favorite quotes. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good.
One of my favorites too.
These are the 3 things that I would mention from an attacker's perspective.
Thank you, Ofek. So maybe just to finish off our talking part here, and then we'll switch over to the Q&A. Looking at 2026, predictions for what's coming down the pike from both the attacker side and also, the defensive side. Where are we going to see a lot of work done in 2026, and what should you watch out for?
Sure. 2026, it seems to me that we're heading in a trajectory where a lot of institutions and governments are looking into Web3, are thinking whether this is a place to invest a significant portion of funds. And if we thought that Web3 was big before, imagine what happens when, I don't know, the US Treasury starts to pulling in a lot of funds into that as well. That would mean a lot stricter regulations and a lot higher requirements from protocols that will be audited from the due diligence from those institutions. I'm seeing a lot of, from the defensive side, having your documentation, having your audits and contests, and your how do you handle if you have been attacked? This is going to be a lot more standardized, and I see protocols who have that, who can pass the regulations, jump way ahead in that future. From the attacker side, I feel like we're going to see a lot more Web 2, Web 3 mixed attacks. I feel like attackers have been checking the water, and they see that social engineering and combination attacks between the two is now the lowest hanging fruit. Whereas we had for a while Web3, just somebody forgot to remove from public to private some sort of method, right? Maybe that was 2 years ago, 3 years ago, right? Things like that. We are not in that era for the most part. The protocols they're developing, the infrastructure are bigger. They're doing a lot more audits and contests and bug bounties, so the overall quality of the code is higher. So the attacker is going to look elsewhere.
Just feeding off of that, Ofek, because I absolutely agree. I would say, looking at it by analogy, in the world of Web 2, it used to be that the most common hack was the open port. And everybody was scanning the internet for open RDP ports on old versions of Windows. And that was your way into enterprise systems. And that was a devastating attack vector. And over time, security tools got better. Security scanners, it came into the mainstream, and people started closing down ports. And suddenly that wasn't so easy. So what happened is attackers settled on ransomware. And I would say on the Web 2 side, the enterprise side, the biggest business in malicious action today is absolutely ransomware, because the most vulnerable link in the chain in most large enterprises is the not particularly computer literate email user who clicks on a link, downloads something, installs it, and it spreads, and suddenly the attacker has a way to bring down the enterprise, and their goal is business disruption in return for money. We will basically stop disrupting your business if you give us the money. Of course, usually they just take the money and don't actually stop the ransomware attack. But regardless, this is the essential method of attack. To me, I see an analogous thing happening here. To your point, Ofek, it used to be that something was just left open. A contract was just vulnerable, and there wasn't enough thought put into the design, and it was too easy to steal massive amounts of money. The big protocols don't operate that way anymore. So I think the attention is going to focus towards social and off-chain, where there's still an opportunity to craft the ransomware of Web3. And what would happen if someone were to bring down a protocol operation so that governance came to a halt, or bring down front ends so that they couldn't be used, or exploit them in other ways? So I think that's where we're going to see a lot of energy and effort this year on the attacker side. And I think private key exfiltration as a standard means of doing business for the malicious actors of the world will only grow. The more people continue to use your browser extension as your wallet to move large amounts of money, you're just asking for it. You really are. I mean, it's not a safe way to transact, and any security professional could tell you that. This is not a good idea. So thank you, Ofek, for the very enlightening talk, at least for me. I think we covered quite a lot of ground. We do have a few questions to start with, and we'll go to question and answer now. So if you have any questions, feel free to feed them into the YouTube comments, and we'll get going. So first question was really someone looking for advice here about the CPIMP attack, and how do you protect against it? And this person is using ERC 1967 proxies and UUPS, the pattern from Open Zeppelin. And I'll just give my 2 cents and then on to you, Ofek. And my 2 cents is just initialization. It's really just about designing it carefully. So at the end of the day, what happened with the protocols that were attacked is there has to be a way to get in the middle. And if you do everything in proper sequence in single transactions, you don't have that problem. But if you need to deploy your contracts, initialize them, and then go back and set a proxy a proxy reference on another contract, which is often what happened, someone can front run that second initialization command. What do you think, Ofek?
Sure. I'm going to give away a gem, something that I've been reporting on for a year. It's been hidden in my pocket because everybody misses it. If you have a protocol that has multiple contracts that you need to initialize, and you're using something like Foundry, that doesn't promise that the initialization is a single contract, is a single transaction. As a matter of fact, it's not. You can build a contract that does all the initialization for you, and then calling that contract is a single transaction. But if you don't have that mechanism and you don't have double ownership or something like that, then you better be sure that somebody at some point is going to write a bot that is going to find that you're doing multiple initialization, and that it's just going to go and sandwich you between those, and good luck. You're talking specifically about attacks like the proxy in the middle. For that, I would say, you guys think so hard about how to develop the protocol and how to deploy it safely. I would use those resources and use any consultation that you'd like to figure out after it's deployed how you can verify that it's really what you intend to be deployed. It's on chain. Obviously, you can have it simulated in your own virtual, sure. But on chain, what is currently sitting in the storage slot that you expected, how do you verify that that is what you expected to be there? Is how you proof yourself against any sort of attack like that. And obviously, going through Etherscan or going through any of those, reading the actual transactions that happened in the block that had your initialization, and just see if there's somebody who called your initialization before you could, right? You can have filters, you can build customs, there's tools to do that, and you can check if somebody called that method for your contract and see if somebody did. This is why I'm saying don't be paranoid, right? But also be cautious. If it's just a test net or something like that, sure, right? You're just testing, you're doing something like that. But if it intended to have funds in it, if you have your reputation on the line, then make sure that what is on chain is what you think it is.
And Ofek, to your point, actually, if you looked at Etherscan and you read the transactions with the infected contracts, you could see the extra delegate call. It is there. It's just that nobody looks. And so I think at the end of the day, to your point, it's a matter of once your contract is deployed, make sure you run some test transactions and you actually look instruction by instruction and confirm that there's no additional delegate calls in there or anything else you don't expect. And then you have some confidence that you're safe. Another question came in, which is, what do you think about the future of security contests and bounties in regards to the strict rules being implemented? So Ofek, why don't you take that one first?
Sure. I think current contests and bounties, mostly contests, face a very hard problem. And that is, I'm going to call it AI spammers. It's people who are not out of the goodness of their hearts, using LLMs to submit 200, whatever, different submissions, overloading the development team and the contest platform. And the problem with it is LLMs are convincing. They are wrong, but they're convincingly wrong. And so the time it takes for you to say why the LLM is incorrect is a lot longer than the time it takes the actual LLM to write the incorrect thing. What I want to happen is to have some sort of penalty for contests if you're submitting multiple different things that are incorrect, or not a penalty, but maybe if you do get a reward, it will be reduced, something like that. I'm not a contest organizer, so I definitely just, if you are, think about it before you take my advice. In terms of strict rules for bug bounties, it really depends because there's tension, right? Protocols want to pay the least amount that they can get away with, but they don't want to appear cheap because word gets around really quick. If a protocol doesn't pay or classify something as low, where it's like a critical, you better bet that the bug bounties are not going to work for that protocol. And there are people on the market buying vulnerabilities. So the protocols have a big incentive, usually much more than the bounty, to actually pay out. We just saw from Immunify a $3 million bounty paid out a couple days ago. So this is the highest ever. So the trajectory in terms of actual bounties handed out seem to increase quite a bit. So my fear is mostly contests and LLM spamming, and that's mostly what I've seen.
So my opinion, and it's probably not the most, well, I'm not sure if it's a popular opinion or not, but my opinion is that the contest process is challenging, it's flawed, and I'm not sure if it's going to last. And I'm not saying eliminate contests today because they play a role in the industry that has not been filled by a better method. But I think there's a major challenge from a business perspective as DeFi protocols start looking to get institutional money and go mainstream to the broader financial system, to say that we have a system out there that we believe might be exploitable, and we're running a contest of, anybody in the world to try to exploit it and then get funds for doing so. I think that's a problematic construct, particularly when you might see that those funds are going to malicious actors in places where you've got money laundering issues or otherwise serious compliance concerns. So I'm not here to offer the answer to what to do about contests, but I think the LLMs are the tip of the iceberg in what's problematic about the entire construct. And as an industry, we're going to have to figure out a better way. And it's maybe a year or two out, but we've got a little bit of time to figure out the answer.
Maybe I'll also say a couple 2 cents. If you are a developer, or if you're working in a contest platform, from Web 2, right? Researchers need a very specialized set of training. That is very expensive and usually very long, especially in Web 2 that is more mature. So the training to get a researcher to a useful position is so long and so expensive that basically if you want to be a junior researcher in Web 2, you're going to have a tough few years to get anything. In Web 3, we have this incredible way to onboard people, to incentivize them to use their own time to study, to grow, where nobody is paying them for that training, only if they have findings. But imagine, this is such a great idea. You convince people to train themselves without needing to pay them, and then they reach a specialization high enough that they become useful. Web3 needs a much higher ratio of researcher to developer than Web 2 because the attack surface is so much easier. Even if I find a vulnerability in a bank tomorrow, theoretically speaking, right, and I attack and I steal funds, there will be people at my door. Not that it happened last week, but right, there is in Web3, if I find sort of this vulnerability, I can set up a proxy chain, I can do stuff, and nobody's going to be at the door. So you're going to need a much higher researcher to developer ratio than Web 2, and for that you need some sort of mechanism to train them.
Absolutely agree. So those are all the questions that we have, and unless anyone else posts a last-minute question here, we're going to wrap up. Thank you all for registering for the event and joining us. We'll send out, obviously, a link to the recording so that you can enjoy and any other follow-up materials that we have in mind. And of course, we are here to help. We're a security consultancy. We're in the business of advising on security, all things security. And if you have any further questions, either formally or informally, we're happy to help. Thank you all for the time today. Best of luck with the rest of your day and have a great weekend.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Ofek.